Zoom rules, and then we'll get rolling with the agenda. Awesome. Okay, thanks everyone for showing up here from all of your varied locations. Great to see everybody, or at least going to hear from you. I'll start. I'm Pedro Marquez, the Executive Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee, and I'll just kind of point out people based on where I see them on my screen, so we don't talk over each other. So Tana, why don't you go next?
Tana Knoll, I'm the Associate Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
Sierra?
Sierra Harris, Freshwater Conservation Project Manager with the Nature Conservancy based in Bozeman.
All right, Ben.
Hey everybody, good to see you. Ben Laporte, Programs Manager for the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
Okay, Roy.
Roy Morris with George Grant TU based in Butte.
Paul and Sandy.
From Glenn.
All right, Chris Edgington.
Good evening, everyone. Chris Edgington with Montana Trout Unlimited, based here in Dillon.
Awesome. Gary, you're up next.
Gary Burnett with Heart of the Rockies Initiative, and I live in the Blackfoot and have an office in Missoula.
Awesome. Scott, long time no see.
Hello, everybody. Scott Reynolds, George Grant TU, and also just a longtime regular member.
Awesome. Great to see you. And Cole, you're up next.
Hey everyone, Cole Mannix. I'm here to present a little bit later as a guest with Gary from a family that ranches up in Helmville.
Awesome. Jim? You're on mute, Jim.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Jim Hagenbarth, the rancher in Glenn in Kilgore, Idaho.
Great. Dean, you're next. Dean, you get that? Dean, you hearing us okay? No. I'm going to skip Dean and go to Matt.
Hello, everyone. Matt Norberg with the Montana DNRC, hydrologist up in Helena.
Okay, Wade, you're up next.
Hi, guys. Wade Fellon, outfitter in Wise River, and a big fan of all the work you all do.
Great to see you. Glad you were able to make it, Wade. Ann, you're up next. Long time no see.
Hi. Hi, guys. Let's see. I am on Ann Schwend, water planner in the Upper Missouri. I'm in Helena. Love to see all those faces.
Awesome. Peter, you're next. Yep. Nope, nothing from Peter. Oh, there he comes.
Yeah, no, I am. I forgot to unmute. Yeah.
All right. There's Peter. Rancher, Upper Big Hole. Jared.
Yeah, Jared Beaver, new extension wildlife specialist for Montana State University out of Bozeman, but live outside of Billings. Split time between both.
Awesome.
So
great to have you join us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank y'all for the invite.
Absolutely. And Dominique.
I'm Dominique from the Ruby Valley Conservation District and Watershed Council.
Awesome. Great to have so many folks here joining us today. Tana, you want to take it over?
Sure. All right. Just a couple Zoom housekeeping things today. There is a chat box, so you're welcome to ask questions as we're going along, but if you'd rather type it in the chat box, you can do that too. It's down at the bottom toolbar. It says more, and then there's a chat option. There's also reactions. It's right next to the more option. There's a clap or thumbs up. You're welcome to do that if you want. You can't, please try to keep yourself muted if you're not talking, just so we don't have too much background noise. And just so you know, the meeting is being recorded. So, and I think that's about it that we need to share. So as far as Zoom rules, let me pull up the agenda real quick. All right, how does that look?
Looks great, Tana.
Yep, looks good. I think that was the answer, Ben, to your question, is she turned up the reading view of the slide.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So let's go straight to Matt with the precip report, please.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, Tana, can you help me out with that? All right, can you guys all see my screen here?
Not yet, Matt. There you go.
All right. So this is the September stream flow precipitation report for the Big Hole. I'm sure a lot of you guys keep good tabs on everything on the river, but as you know, August, September stream flows in the Big Hole have generally been below the long-term median values, and currently some of the sites are at or below the 25th percentile, mostly the upper river. Precipitation throughout the valley has been below average during basically the late summer months, you know, late July, August, and then even into September, which resulted in decreased water availability across the watershed, hence the low flows. Unfortunately, stream flows at the Wisdom Bridge have dropped below the 20 CFS mark, and they continue to remain below that 20 CFS, which prompted a fishing closure from the confluence of the North Fork to Saginaw Bridge on the Skinner Meadows Road. The good news is back in August, hoot owl restrictions were lifted for sections 2, 4, and 5 as the water temperatures decreased with some cooler weather and some precipitation that fell in the valley. So here is just a snapshot of flows today. As I was saying, I think it's the fourth gauge down is the gauge at Wisdom. We're at 15.7. Long-term median flow for that site is about 34 CFS. So, you know, there's just not a whole lot of water coming in right now, and lack of precipitation has really been the driver on that. And here's hydrographs from Wisdom and also the Melrose site from August 1st till current. And you can see some of these nice spikes, especially in Wisdom. A couple little rainstorms here and there, also in coordination with landowner contributions, help bump the river up, but Mother Nature is really the driving factor right now. So precipitation, year-to-date precipitation in the Big Hole is currently 99% of average and 93% of average in the Jefferson River Basin. So it was a good year overall, especially late spring and early summer precipitation, but then the bottom kind of fell out with just no moisture. That above average snowpack in the basin resulted in above average stream flows in the Big Hole this season till late summer. And precipitation mid to late summer has been below average, causing declining stream flows. And just one example, the total precipitation in August recorded at the Snowtell sites were 32% of average. So that's really low. And one of our indicators that we really look at in the valley, especially the upper valley, that Dark Horse Lake high elevation Snowtell site only recorded 0.2 inches, which is 10% of normal in August. So pretty dismal. The good news is September precipitations have fared a little better than August, but they're still below average. But I think there's some hope as we move forward. This is kind of an interesting map. This obviously is the entire Jefferson River Basin itself. It also includes reservoir levels, as you see here, but it just really goes to show you some of these sites, you know, how much lower they are than the normal for this time of year. Here's that Dark Horse site. This is Bloody Dick. And you can see along the valley, or along the watershed, they're pretty low. And so here are just some charts that show precipitation for the whole water year in general. And you can really see, if you look here at this July mark right here, around 1st July, kind of mid-July, you just flatline out. And that's really been one of the drivers for, you know, just the lack of water availability, is just no precipitation. I'm kind of hounding on that, but that's how it's going. Same thing in the Jefferson Basin as a whole. As it's just flatlined out, it's slipped below that average level of 100%. So now we'll move on to the forecast, which is a little bit rosier picture, I'm hoping. So just recently, within the past couple weeks, we've been talking, or I've been talking about over the course of the last couple months, how we're projected to go into La Nina, and we were in a La Nina watch, and now we've transitioned to a La Nina advisory. So the synopsis is La Nina conditions are present and are likely to continue through the northern hemisphere winter. And there's a 75% chance of that. So what does this mean for Montana and probably the Big Hole specifically? So generally speaking, and there's lots of factors that can play into this, but generally speaking, La Nina winters in the southern tier of the US tend to be warmer and drier, while the northern tier and Canada tend to be colder, which can sometimes lead to increased amounts of moisture. And these events tend to reach their maximum strength during October to February, and maybe even to March and potentially April, depending on sea surface temperatures. So down below is just a nice explanation map of kind of what is the typical weather pattern associated with La Nina conditions. However, this is kind of the weird part, but the 3-month outlook for September, October, November is for above average temperatures and equal chances of below to normal precipitation. So like I said, this 3-month outlook kind of disagrees a little bit with La Nina conditions, but the models are still indicating that we're going to transition to wetter conditions as winter progresses, which is favorable for snowpack. So this is temperature. You can see we're above average conditions, and then precipitation as we move forward for the next couple months. We're right on that edge of above to kind of near normal conditions. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll start getting a little more moisture, and we'll have a good snowpack year coming up. So that is all I have. Any questions from anyone? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Hey, thanks very much, Matt.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Sounds like everyone's hoping we get a little rain this weekend. Would help things out quite a bit.
Yeah, there's definitely a chance, and it's most needed right now. So.
Okay. Tana, would you mind pulling up director report? Great, thank you. Okay, I'll just kind of go sort of start with kind of high level stuff that's on my agenda. One thing that I get is, you've probably all heard of, but is the census that's happening in across the country, really. Just the importance of everybody filling that census out. I mean, there's dollars that come to every state for every individual that fills out the census. So, you know, Montana falling short on filling that out would mean fewer resources coming to the state, particularly in rural areas, making sure that we're counted. So just a friendly reminder, if you haven't filled out your census data yet, do that, please. The stream gauge survey that we've got going on right now, it's still happening. The information, we've been putting it out on our emails. It's still available. Important thing here, I don't know what the last numbers were. I think at our last meeting, we were at somewhere like 600 responses to that survey. And it was heavily influenced by recreation interests and a lot of professionals in the field, engineering types that use stream gauge data to find rating curves for their hydrologic analysis, stuff like that. Really need to hear from the ranching community on the use of stream gauges. So if you haven't filled this out, please do so. It only takes like 5 minutes, and it will help inform the state's process of identifying our stream gauge infrastructure, what's missing in that infrastructure, and how the state can fund that infrastructure without relying on groups like us to keep these gauges running, which is currently the case. Moving forward, last month we did announce the grayling decision. Oh, sorry, Tana, still on the same slide. Thanks. So the grayling was determined by the Fish and Wildlife Service to not be eligible for listing because its populations, its numbers are doing better, in a large part due to the conservation activities in the upper river, folks on this call that participate in the CCAA, and also groups like the Big Hole Committee and the River Foundation, TU, TNC, all of the groups that have contributed to all the work up there. I thought it was interesting that the litigants, when they announced their take on that ruling, you know, they mentioned all of that conservation work, but they said, but it's not enough, is kind of their conclusion. I took that as an invitation, so I did invite one of the litigants, Pat Monday, up to view some of our restoration work, and we had a really good conversation. He really understood at an ecological level what we're doing and all of the improvements we're making for habitat and how that will lead to water improvements in the basin. So we left it at that. I haven't had follow-up with him, but I think all in all, it was a positive engagement, and I look forward to, you know, kind of keeping the message going that if all the conservation work that's going on, if they say it wasn't enough, then let's do more. You know, let's put all our resources together to really hit all of the markers that we need to hit as far as improving habitat for that fish, so that we avoid the heavy-handed kind of oversight that comes with listing. It's my understanding that listing of the species is not going to lead to a dramatic increase in funds available to do the work that's already being done. So sticking with what we got going and just ramping it up is the direction. On that note, the Dillon Tribune will be out with us tomorrow. They're interested in putting together a piece on that listing and the importance of all the work that's been going on. So I'll be meeting with a reporter tomorrow, just before our volunteer activity, our fence pulling activity up in California Creek. Lastly, kind of big picture, we all, I think, probably witnessed a real change in the amount of license plates from elsewhere in all the places that we like to recreate. You know, it's something that's been talked about before, climate refugees seeking places that still have water. Now we have COVID refugees seeking places where they would love to work online remotely and not go into their offices in big cities. All of that, I think, points to a need for us to revisit a lot of the activities that the committee was heavily involved in the early years of land use planning, and just in the anticipation of more people interested in places like the Big Hole to call home and all the changes that that brings. We want to be in front of all that. And reach out to our planners in all the 4 counties and are looking forward to engaging them moving forward. and seeing how we can, best, I guess if the big hole is going to grow or change in any way, let's do it the best way we possibly can and make sure folks that come into the valley are coming in with a conservation resource kind of centered lifestyle and focus. So anything we can do on that front, we'll be looking to do that. Well, so that's the big picture. Tana, you can slide forward. Thank you. That last picture was Ben cutting his teeth doing stream assessments, which with me measuring stream channels. That was on Oregon Creek, just getting ready to report out, final report for that project. That was all afternoon, getting that data together. All right, we'll go to the next one. Cool. This picture is in the Smelter Hills injured area. These are dozer pits that were built right by that little draw there used to be a 25-foot deep hole in the ground that we filled in. And those are dozer pits, slowing water down. It just looks tremendous. Work that Ben oversaw in 2018 is really coming together nicely, and the landscape's healing really well. Okay. As far as our kind of partnerships and just BHWC activities, I'm going to set up to meet with the steering committee later this month. I've got conversations going with board members. I've been slow to get to all of them, but I will still be plugging away and trying to find the right time to meet with everybody on the governing board. And kind of along the lines of walking Mr. Monday up the hill to show him the restoration work, meeting this moment with engagement and inclusion. Any chance I get to move us from this sort of, I'm in this camp and you're in that camp, and the ranchers are on one side and the guide communities are on the other side, or whatever camp you want to put yourself in, I'm really interested in breaking that down and really an all in, everybody that's interested in the resources of the big hole, really finding a way to come together, get out of their particular viewpoints on how things are. Because as you all know, it's really complicated. And you can take any one issue and see it from a variety of different angles. And that's what I've been spending some time trying to do, engaging with folks and including them. So that's just where my head's at. So I welcome conversations. If they have to be difficult conversations, so be it, let's do it. I had some good conversations with Heart of the Rockies, the High Divide Collaborative. We did have a good sit down to talk about wildlife conflict reduction. There's various groups with conflict reduction programs kind of scattered all over the place. And I think there's growing interest at all levels, from agency levels and also from private foundations, to see some sustainability to these efforts, some continuity and connection between all of these efforts. So kind of continuing on that idea of getting real about connectivity, and you'll hear a lot more about that. I'm really excited to hear Cole and Gary's presentation tonight. So I'll kind of leave it at that because I think we'll get into much more depth. I've been following a little bit the Beaverhead, the BVRD working group. That's a forestry-based group of all the forestry agencies kind of meeting once a month regularly to talk to each other and just coordinate on activities related to forest management. There is a Big Hole Vision document that I don't know a whole lot about. I think it's a little bit old, maybe going on some 10 years old, where folks managing forests had kind of this bigger vision for the big hole, where they were going to work, how they were going to work. And that group is re-looking at that document. And so I'm going to make sure we have our eyes and ears on that and see what that starts looking like. As you all know, and I've heard from our governing board, forest management is a big deal, whether it's for fire and safety precautions or even for water availability. There's a lot of sticks in the forest lot of sticks that are pulling a lot of water, and in many places a lot more trees than there used to be. So we're staying on top of that. And I also spent some time this month touring, taking people on tours up in the Anaconda injured area. We had a work day with some environmental studies students last week. They helped us build some beaver dam analogs, and I was able to tour Vanna and her supervisory staff up and around the Mount Hagen area to show off kind of what we've been doing up there for the last almost 10 years. Really, it's work that I think everyone should be proud of, even though only a few of you have ever actually seen it. Again, still have an invitation, open invitation out there to anyone who wants to take me up on it to go see some of this work. I think it's pretty impressive. And in case we don't say it, maybe Ben will address this, but we are having a volunteer day tomorrow to pull some fencing off of some plants that we put in 2016. So T-posts and metal fence is going to be coming out, and FWP pretty much wants to give it away to anyone who wants this stuff. More than likely, we will be staging these materials in that California Creek pullout area. So it's welded wire fence. A common phrase, a Deer Buster is a brand that makes this stuff. It's 4-inch by 2-inch holes in the steel fence. And it's 8 feet tall and 8-foot T-posts. So there'll be lots of those. All right, that's it for that slide. Yeah, kind of last little piece on the engagement. I just wanted to say, I just acknowledge Wade Fallon and the conversation we had earlier this afternoon. I think we had a really good sort of meeting of the minds of the two prominent, nonprofits specific to the Big Hole. And I think there's a lot of room for us to move forward together and complement each other's work. So just a lot of excitement building that I hope to share out with everybody moving forward. Drought and gauges. I just sent a bill to the USGS, sent a check to the USGS for $3,900 to help them keep their stream gauge infrastructure on the Big Hole operating. And there's still one other large check that I need to write to the DNRC. This is part of my ongoing work with the stream gauge working group that the state is running, trying to get the state to really cover this infrastructure is my ultimate goal. We can take this basically $10,000 that we donate, that we contribute to this infrastructure. I think we can do a whole lot more with that money. And it is pretty critical infrastructure that, fishing guides and ranchers, folks are checking that all the time. There's been a lot of back and forth this year as far as the drought management plan, and we're looking forward to getting the drought committee reunited again to talk about how this year went and changes that could be made. And FWP is also considering some fairly dramatic changes to river restrictions and things. So a lot to talk about there. On the project front, kind of cruise through this as fast as I can. We finally got our Bureau of Reclamation planning grant signed. So we've got 2 years of capacity funding. We're going to do 3 things with that money. We're going to update our watershed restoration plans. So that will be a really all hands on deck outreach effort to prioritize where we need to get work done on this watershed, in the whole watershed, to address the biggest impairments and the issues that are leading to, where can we improve water availability? Where can we improve habitat for fish and critters? This sets us up for the next kind of decade of grant applications, particularly for Clean Water Act 319 grant funding through the DEQ. It's going to set us up to engage with Lower River, so Notch Bottom down the Twin. This is an area that we have had historically fewer visits, we tend to be down there less and tend to have less participation from folks down there. And it's something that we've identified a long time ago that we need to engage more. So we finally have some capacity to do that. And we'll also get a design done to fix the impending horror story of the Pennington Bridge that I'd be happy to tell anybody what that's about if you're curious offline. Moving forward, the RCPP is a big NRCS program, and I think we've identified a great path forward to apply to that program in 2021, looking specifically at irrigation infrastructure. This goes along with my what I told the steering committee when I took this job. Is like, I'm not interested in reinventing anything. I think we've done a lot of work assessing and prioritizing projects. So we have several irrigation infrastructure priority documents already that have identified where we can do improvements in irrigation infrastructure, and an RCPP program could be a long-term funding source to really get all of those highest needs addressed. In concert with that, Tana has been coordinating with some professors at Western that would support that work, and good conversations with the NRCS and the Intermountain West joint venture as well. That's looking like a promising avenue forward that will really kind of take shape in 2021. And in the meantime, Ben is pursuing money to continue funds for forestry related work that'll mostly be targeted to the Eastern Pioneers and the Highland Mountains. So both sides of the I-15 corridor there. On the communications front, our Hold Back Snowpack film that we launched at our last meeting has over 1,000 views already on YouTube. Hope you guys are enjoying it and sharing it out. I think it gives a great overview of the work that we're trying to get accomplished on the ground as far as that aspect of all the work that we do. More little short films are in the works that are coming. And stay up to date on all of your social media. Tana and Ben are just doing a bang up job staying active on social media. So if you do visit Instagram and Facebook, make sure to visit our pages and get connected to us. All right, that was a lot of words. I'm gonna kick it over to Tana. Unless there's any questions, but I'd prefer to kind of roll through this.
All right. For the wildlife portion, our Range Rider program is in progress right now. It goes until September 30th. This is the 11th year of the Range Rider program, and our Range Rider, Chet Robertson, has been with us that entire time. He's actually the longest standing BHWC employee. He monitors the allotments, 6 grazing allotments on the Forest Service from July 1st to September 30th, monitoring for predator activity and livestock condition. So in 2020, we've got some new game cameras. There's been a lot of wolf activity. There's a resident grizzly bear new this year to the area in Jackson. And our funding this year for the program has been provided by the Livestock Loss Board and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Our wildlife conflict reduction, our carcass removal and composting program. This is the, let's see, 5th year, I believe, of this program. And John Costa, who is a Wisdom resident and works for the Department of Transportation, also works part-time for us, managing our compost site up by Wisdom and driving the carcass removal dump truck, which we borrow from the Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. That's a really great partnership because they also pay for fuel for us. In 2020, John removed 53 carcasses from 9 producers, and funding was provided by the Livestock Loss Board and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. The compost site is pretty much put to bed for the winter now. We do the bulk of our carcass pickup in the spring during calving, so it's just kind of breaking down now. We also provide carcass removal services in Sage Creek for the Centennial Valley Association, and they pay us for that. So Just a nice way for us to give John a little bit more work. And that's John in the picture there. This year we put together some loaner toolkits for both for livestock loss for our producers and also to help residents recreate safely in the presence of bears. We have a lot of black bears in the area, and we're starting to see more grizzlies and anticipating that we're going to see more increased grizzly pressure in the future. So right now we have a livestock loss prevention toolkit, and producers can borrow the whole toolkit or any of the supplies in the kit. It includes scare devices, temporary electric fencing, bear spray, resource guides, and more. Funding for that program for this kit was provided by the Livestock Loss Board and the Vital Ground Foundation. And then we also put together a bear safety kit this year, which the Vital Ground Foundation funded us for. And it includes all kinds of bear safety devices, backpacking containers, bear spray, resource guides, and we also have bear-resistant garbage cans free to Big Hole residents while supplies last. So we're just really wanting to get everybody ready for grizzly bears being in our watershed. Oh, and if anybody would like any more information about that, or if you want to borrow or test any of our equipment, you can get a hold of me. My number is there on the slide or at the info address, or just if you contact any of us at BHWC, we can get you set up. So also new to our wildlife conflict reduction programs this year is our focus on beavers, and we're looking at reducing human-beaver conflict using non-lethal and habitat-sustaining methods. So, excuse me. So Ben actually is kind of kicked this off, and I'm jumping in and learning more about beavers and beaver conflict, which is really exciting. There's a virtual field trip coming up. Oh, that should say 11 a.m. there, sorry. A virtual field trip coming up on October 8th at 11 a.m. The Clark Fork Coalition, the National Wildlife Federation, and the Defenders of Wildlife are putting on. And I think Ben and I are both planning to attend that. And we have already been getting our feet wet with some beaver projects. So one of them is a beaver culvert fence at Sugarloaf Lodge or the Soup Shack there on Mount Hagen. And then the other one, we are working with FWP, or helped FWP look into doing a pond leveler there at the Mule Ranch. So if you are having any problems with beavers, please get in touch with us and we can try and figure out something to do about it. All right, so this one, there's a lot to go over here, and I went to this meeting last week in Jackson at the Jackson Fire Hall on brucellosis, and I'm just going to ask Dean to jump in here if I forget anything or misstate anything, because I was kind of drinking from the fire hose at this meeting. The meeting was put together and was as a response to the 2 elk in the Ruby Range that tested positive for brucellosis, and there was concern in the Big Hole and neighboring communities about the possibility of the designated surveillance area expanding. And so I think that spurred this meeting. I was invited by Vanna Bacadori to attend the meeting, and it was a limited group, local ranchers, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, both Vanna and Jesse Newby, the new wildlife biologist for FWP in the Dillon area. He replaced Craig Fager. Were there, as well as Jennifer Ramsey, the FWP wildlife veterinarian, and then Marty Zalewski and Tani Samansky, veterinarians for the Department of Livestock, answering questions. Brucellosis is a bacterial disease caused by Brucella abortus. It causes infected cows to abort their pregnancies prematurely, can be devastating to herd health, and there's a lot of testing that goes along with brucellosis. The designated surveillance area is just outside of the Big Hole, so I think that's where a lot of the concern comes in, is concern over it expanding into the Big Hole. And the testing, so all sexually intact cattle or domestic bison must be tested within 30 days of leaving the DSA or changing ownership. There's a few exceptions there, but the testing is pretty extensive and takes a lot of time, and money and effort from producers. This is a map of the designated surveillance area, so you can see we're just right on the edge of it, but it's very large. And so some of the main points, the state veterinarians said that the DSA is more likely to expand than decrease in the near future, but they weren't able to say exactly when or where. Expansion is based on elk movement in areas of least information. So what they do is they test the elk in that area. If they're all negative for brucellosis, the DSA will stay the same. If they find any that are positive, then they will look at potentially expanding the DSA. A lot of producers had some concerns about whether or not it's possible that DSAs could be taken away and the financial burden of testing would be put on producers. And luckily, Dr. Zalewski said that that is very unlikely, and that federal law states that DSAs will stay in place basically as long as the state is doing their job, identifying the DSA, managing disease within the DSA, and doing sufficient testing for brucellosis. So, and I think it sounds like they are on top of that. It was apparent at this meeting that there is a need for better methods and types of testing for brucellosis, but because Brucella is on some sort of federal terrorism agent list, research and development is really heavily restricted. And so that's kind of the next step, is it really needs to be taken off of this list. And the Big Hole Watershed Committee has already sent a letter of support, supporting the removal of Brucella from that list. So hopefully that'll go through sometime in the near future. And then the state veterinarians mentioned that they're asking the Montana legislature to build an indemnity fund to reimburse producers for losses that occurred due to state-directed testing. So that was a pretty big mouthful there. Do Dean or Jim or anyone else have anything to add?
I think you did a pretty good job.
Thank
Kind
you.
of explaining what we were talking about that day. Sorry, Jim.
I will say this is a 3-hour meeting, so there was quite a bit to summarize there.
You did a good job.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Oh, now you're muted again.
Try that.
Now we hear you.
Okay. I was on a 3-hour meeting with sponsored by Alex Field in the Western Land Alliance with producers in Wyoming, looking at elk on private ground and what to do about it. DSAs are something we're going to be living with the rest of our lives. I question whether or not APHIS and the state of Montana legislature will continue to do the amount of testing that's going to need to be done to adequately protect our herds. The loss of the animals that you have from the initial test is insignificant compared to if we happen to miss an animal and go through a cabin and lose our entire herd because we are so severely infected. APHIS no longer indemnifies for whole herd condemnation. So that's this is a very serious issue, and it shouldn't be slighted. And my confidence in agency people as we deal with this, there's going to be a lot of money involved, and I don't know how long you'll stand beside us. But someone's going to have to. I don't know if we can stand the cost ourselves, but if we don't do a good job and manage our herds and make damn sure we don't get brucellosis in them and go through a cabin, it's not going to be a good deal. So it's very serious.
Did we skip over the steering committee report?
Oh, I think we did. Yeah.
We did too.
Steering committee have anything to chime in with?
Gotta unmute again, Jim.
I'm all right now.
Yeah, you're
Can
good.
you hear me now? The Western Landowners Alliance is also working with the Livestock Loss Board in the legislature, trying to get more money for predator issues. And I believe they're trying to get another couple $100,000. Cole, you probably know more about that than I do, even though you're not with them anymore. But in the Western Landowners Alliance has helped us quite a bit on these issues, and are asking for people to participate in their meetings. But that's all I have. Except for George Edwards can't do much lobbying, but we can. So we got to remember that and find out when those committee meetings are, and make sure we have some representation there. A steering committee, we haven't done much since COVID.
All right. Yeah, we'll get together towards the end of this month, Jim and everybody, and kind of we're getting together a quarterly basis. So, all right. Without anything else, let's jump to Ben. Ben, if you could kind of cruise through that pretty quick so we can get to our presenters. There's gone a little bit longer than I expected. Thanks.
Yep. Let's see. Tiana, can you share my screen? Okay. Okay, can you guys see my screen? All right, sweet. Yeah, I'll run through this, guys. The majority of my month has been on site on Hagen, running crews and running oversight for the construction that we have going on here. This is the MCC crew that I've been working with for the last month, and they're troopers. They've been hanging in, and you know, they're not used to this smoky weather. A lot of them, this is their first time in the state of Montana. So kudos to those guys. One of the highlights of my month was I was invited to join the Riverscape Restoration Network. And this is a group of 90 plus professionals in the Intermountain West who work on low-tech process-based restoration. So basically everything that I do in my program, this is a good opportunity to hear about other people's projects, hear about some of the issues they have going on, and kind of just get in with this cohort of restoration practitioners. So I was excited to get that email. The lady actually saw our Holding Back the Snowpack video and was sharing it across the whole Western states and reached out to me. So I thought that was pretty neat. I also wrote a Big Hole Breezes article preaching the same water storage, everything that you guys have heard before. I use the same themes that we use in our short film that we released last month. Pedro mentioned the U of M Student Volunteer Day. I helped Pedro out building some BDAs with these students, and I thought it was pretty cool to just show these students and show these guys what we do and what we're all about, and get them out of the classroom and get their hands dirty and get into the field and actually start to do it. So I think they had a good time. Like I said, most of my month has been up in the Anaconda Uplands. We've been building these 3 large spreader dikes and 1 very large gully check dam. Those are now done, and we plan on moving on to our Muddy Gulch Beaver Dam restoration project next. We'll be starting that in the next couple weeks. And basically what that project consists of is restoring a abandoned beaver dam at the lower portions of Muddy Gulch, and taking out some of that sediment, setting down the floodplain, creating some depressional wetlands, And it's going to be basically a mini stream restoration project. So what are these spreader dikes that you talk about, Ben? Well, here's this aerial I took of last week. These are the ones that we just constructed, and they're different than what we've done in the past. They're different because there's water flowing through this reach year round. And we wanted to ensure that we built these and we designed these to withstand the spring runoff that's going to occur. And so they're much beefier, and they're built to last. So a lot of earth was moved. A lot of this rock's been brought in too. Here's what they look like on the ground. I think they're pretty cool. They're different than what I'm used to building, but these are turning out really nice. So they're going to hold back a lot of sediment, and they are going to hold back a lot of water. They're going to create some good habitat. This big goalie check dam, what is that? Well, this is what it used to look like on the left side of my screen here. Deep, terribly incised goalie. It's about 15 feet deep there. And so we're gonna plug it up, and we are using big machinery. We're using this geotextile fabric, and we're bringing in a lot of rock. So the lower picture that you see there, is kind of a series of how we constructed it, but the lower photo is taken from today. And we're pretty much done with that. So I'm going to have my MCC guy go up there and seed all the disturbed areas, and we're going to move on to muddy. So wanted to show you guys some footage of what these things look like. Okay. Can you see the video? Anyone? Okay, hold on now, guys. I lost my video. Hold on. Shoot.
Ben, try flipping forward in your slide and then just flip forward one more time. Sometimes activates the video.
Okay, got it. You guys see it now? I hope so.
No, you're on your first slide.
Shoot.
Second.
Let's see here.
Flip one more. Yeah, keep going. I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that. Sorry, guys. Hold on. Jeez. Okay. What do you see now?
Your last slide.
Oh, boy.
There you go. No, that's the film. It's the beginning of the film.
Okay.
Wow.
Cool. You see it now? Technology, folks.
No. Go to their next slide. It looks like that one might be the video. Yeah, there.
Okay, do you see a video now?
Nope.
Let me try. Stop share. Sorry, guys. Try this one more time. Okay, do you see the video playing now?
Looks like you're there, but you gotta hit play and it'll go.
Yeah, it's playing on my screen. Bummer.
Oh, it's just not sharing.
Yeah, let me try this.
There might be a connection issue too. Yeah, it's moving through slowly. I think that's just a bandwidth thing.
Okay. Well, we'll post this stuff on our website and our Instagram, guys, but I just wanted to show you some drone footage, but I don't think it's going to happen. We'll look for that on our social media. And then lastly, Pedro mentioned this volunteer day. I'll plug it one more time, but we're meeting tomorrow at the California Creek restoration area. It's basically the last pull-off if you're heading towards Anaconda before you go up the pass. It's the last pull-off to your right. I can help you with directions if you want, but we're meeting there at 2 o'clock to pull some of this metal fencing from the landscape. So should be a good time. And yeah, I ran through that pretty quick, but that's all I got, guys. So we'll get to the next presenters.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Yep.
All right. Let's tee up Cole Mannix and Gary Burnett, however you guys plan to do it. Which one of you guys going first?
I think Cole's going to tee it off.
All right. Excited to have you guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Ben. So yeah, my name's Cole Mannix, and I, you know, my family ranches in the Blackfoot, and I knew Gary Burnett first as the executive director of the Blackfoot Challenge, and local input on and engagement and decision making on natural resources and wildlife and agriculture was a key thing, as I think it really is a big hole. And that's kind of what our presentation today is about. Up until June, I worked for Western Landowners Alliance, which Jim mentioned, working on wildlife conflict reduction and a variety of issues in Montana. And I've continued a lot of that work in partnership still with Western Landowners Alliance and now Gary Burnett. Back in 2018, the state gathered to talk about the secretarial order on big game migration, SO 3362. And the state obviously has worked on wildlife movement for a long time, and not just big game. You know, they think about it holistically. But the secretarial order, December 2018, at a meeting in Helena, invited a bunch of agency folks and NGO folks and local collaboratives to share that the secretarial order was providing funding, both public funding and private funding through NIFWIF, for work in states, in Western states on migration. And basically FWP was sharing with folks what the secretarial order meant in Montana, and was asking for local engagement on the topic of migration. How would, what do you do all about migration should be managed? In response to that secretarial order, Montana, in an action plan, identified 5 focal areas in the state where they felt like a focus on big game migration pertinent to the secretarial order was a fit. And in the agenda there, I think, is that listed for you guys all to see what those areas are?
It is, yeah.
You've got, the Continental Divide, Rocky Mountain Front. You've got the Malta area with pronghorn migration. You've got the Anaconda Range to Big Hole, Bitterroot, and Upper Clark Fork. Canadian border to Muscle Shell Plains is the Malta area, and then heart of the Salish in the northwestern part of the state. And obviously the situation there is it's different in each landscape significantly. But so Gary with Heart of the Rockies Initiative and Western Landowners Alliance and some others that are representatives of sportsmen's groups, such as the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership and the National Wildlife Federation and a host of partners, kind of came together in a loosely affiliated group just that calls itself the Migrations Coalition. And basically what we did in July is we went to the Private Lands Public Wildlife Council. That is a standing council appointed by the governor that kind of advises FWP on wildlife and working lands. And we asked them to host a meeting this coming December, host a panel that includes representatives, local representatives from each of those 5 focal areas, to share their thoughts about what the local work is in that landscape on migration, what any interests that local area has with respect to wildlife movement and big game movement, any concerns that landscape has, so that PLPW can consider that feedback as the legislative approach, as the legislative session approaches, whether there are funding needs with respect to migration, whether there are research needs, whether there's local capacity needs. Basically, we think that Private Lands Public Wildlife Council is a great body to take a look at this issue of kind of wildlife and working lands. And but in order to have that December meeting, we've got to do the local engagement. And so the purpose of us chatting with you tonight is to ask about the possibility of a local meeting in the Big Hole, where sponsored by the Big Old Watershed Committee, to talk about this issue of migration. Basically, that meeting would be twofold. One purpose would be for FWP and the state to sort of share, here's our approach to migration, here's what it's been traditionally, here's how it is changing as we continue to adapt our strategy and incorporate the secretarial order. And to share any, I think Vanna obviously is already a very regular participant in this group, but to basically just say, hey, here's how we're treating migrations, and here's how we're thinking about it in this region with current planned projects, and here's how we're thinking about it kind of statewide strategically. So it's an opportunity for FWP to share what it's thinking locally, but it's really an opportunity also for folks in the Big Hole and in this region, in this focal area, to share what they're doing, what they know about migration and how it's affecting working lands, and to voice their concerns and interests. And perhaps one or two or a few representatives from that local meeting, maybe it makes sense for them to be the folks to represent that landscape and that landscape's interests and concerns at the December meeting that PLPW will be hosting. And so that's basically what we're approaching you guys about, is we feel that local engagement is incredibly important. Wildlife movement, obviously a lot of these collaborative groups and landowners are working to benefit wildlife and make sure it can still move across the landscape. And yet, and so they may need some kind of support in doing that. But at the same time, clearly with the brucellosis presentation earlier, it presents big concerns and potential risks to the same operations that keep the landscape intact. And so I've had quite a few discussions with folks in Southwest Montana, as an example, about a bill ran in Wyoming during the last session that provided funding for ranches that were quarantined to help cover quarantine costs as a result of positive brucellosis tests. That particular bill, it was a small amount of money at the end of the day, but up to $25,000 per operation could help compensate for quarantine costs when it happened. And that's separate, by the way, from the Marty Zalewski piece that they plan to request compensation for animals that have to be put down due to positive tests, but the quarantine is a separate idea. And so that's just an example of the kind of local interest that PLPW might be interested in hearing. Another example, the first of these local outreach meetings that's I've been working with the Rancher Stewardship Alliance up in the Malta area, as well as the NRCS and TNC and some of the participants in that group. And that local outreach meeting is going to take place on October 6th for a couple hours, actually in person in the evening. And it'll be an opportunity for FWP to kind of share its approach and any ongoing projects, planned projects, and also for landowners and RSA to talk about the projects they have in the works and any concerns. But in their case, they've got quite a few NIFLIF grants that are paying for wildlife-friendly fencing of worn-out replacement of worn-out fences. They have some crested wheatgrass, native grassland restoration projects, and they're trying to fund their Rancher Stewardship Alliance and just be able to meet and convene on the topic. And so state level match for that kind of work is one of the interests that has come up in that landscape. Capacity funding to be able to run RSA. So that's an example of one of the outreach meetings that's taken place. And tonight is just an opportunity for us to share this kind of two-stage process with you guys, the local outreach in the 5 focal areas that FWP has identified, and then the opportunity to present this local perspective on December 1st at this PLPW meeting. Gary, what am I missing? Would you fill in any blanks?
It's a good description. The only thing I would add is that this work has been done in very close cooperation with Fish, Wildlife and Parks, from the director's office to Vanna as an example of a local focal area lead for Fishwater Park. So particularly Renee Lemon in planning and Justin Goody in research, very direct relationship and in communication. So the work is with Fishwater Parks as well, and understanding their interest, and they have a wildlife obviously perspective as well as a deep respect for local interests. I'd say our interest is primarily trying to find out, making sure landowners are in the conversation, and we can understand from a landowner's perspective what might be more broadly thought of as wildlife movement. And even from the directors, talking to the director about that, migration is the sector order, and you hear efforts to define things like corridors and things like that. But we think it's more of a wildlife movement interest or wildlife movement effects or wildlife movement impacts. What are those from a landowner's perspective that you can bring to the Public Lands, Public Wildlife Council and see what might be done with that? And I think the Brucellosis Fund is a clear example. Opportunities for fencing support from a landowner perspective. Conservation easements has come up very strongly in the heart of the Salish in Region 1 as a primary concern because of the timber ground up there. So it's really just an opportunity to make sure from the beginning, an opportunity to make sure landowner voices are at the table, if you will, from a wildlife movement or migration perspective.
So we'd be happy to answer any questions, but just to reiterate that the question to you all, or the ask to you all is this the kind of meeting that would be useful in your neck of the woods, whether virtual or in person, and sometime between now and December, obviously, but in the coming month or two.
So I think I misunderstood a little bit. I thought that this was that meeting. So I apologize if I misrepresented it that way, but I do think that this is a topic that in a meeting that we would be interested in supporting. I'm not sure virtually or in person which one would be better, but I think we want to be involved. What do you think, Pedro?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I appreciate that you guys brought this to my attention. I mean, having a voice at the table, these opportunities, as you all know, don't come very often. I mean, meetings like this, it's hard they're few and far between, and I think they can be impactful. So having the right representation and the right messages, and that really has to come from the producer. So I stand ready to sort of, the committee stands ready to host and coordinate all of these thoughts and perspectives any way that we can. I think it's really got to come from the folks that are going to feel it the most.
And it could be, sort of going back to Tana's point, it could be you have enough amongst yourselves to determine what that might look like and be interested in having somebody be there in December 1st. Cole's, in my perspective, was if it's helpful, as an example with RSA, they're having a specific meeting about it. We're going to Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group tomorrow and just introduce the idea quickly, and we anticipate there might be a larger discussion. But each of these focal area places is going to unfold a little bit differently in terms of how to make sure we're getting an opportunity to make sure we're hearing from private landowner voices.
Do you guys want to be engaged kind of with, as these discussions happen in each location, or is it do you guys want to be a part of those, or are you sort of just, kind of kick them off, moderate, sort of lead them, or is this something that, like, our committee, we can take this and sort of organize something internal to the big hole and then kind of report out to you guys, or touch base again?
I think you can do all of the above. Cole, you might describe how it's playing out in Malta with Rancher Stewardship Alliance, but I think it could be all of the above in terms of how you would like us to participate in those. It might be helpful to have us there to ask questions of us, but if you want to have your own conversation and feel like we're in the way, we certainly don't need to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, we offered to PLPW because we were requesting this, that they hear from focal areas across the state, and that's a big, it's a big ask, and it takes some work to do a good job of hosting discussions in those local areas. And so the members of the Migration Coalition, which Heart of the Rockies initiative is, and which Gary and I are kind of representing today, they said that we've been willing to help organize the meetings and just do some of the legwork and have conversations with FWP about who the right folks are at the table, and plan the meetings. In the case of Malta on October 6th, basically what we'll have is a welcome from the Rancher Stewardship Alliance, which is the local host. We'll have some presentations by landowners who are engaged in projects relevant to pronghorn migration. It's stock water development using EQIP funding, it's wildlife friendly fencing, it's grassland restoration. There'll be a presentation from Andrew Jakes, who studies pronghorn movement and now works for National Wildlife Federation. And then there'll be a presentation by the NRCS, who has a large project in a little bit different part of that same focal area on some of the same types of project for pronghorn. And then after that, we'll move to basically FWP having a chance to share its broader perspective on how it's approaching migration in the state, and any local projects, any local research that it wants to share, and then an opportunity for folks to weigh in on and share with FWP, respond, and then to engage any specific questions that are particularly pertinent to that landscape. And in the case of RSA, as I mentioned, one is just state level match for a bunch of the federal monies that are flowing to do these projects. Obviously, brucellosis is not the same conversation up there as it is in Southwest Montana. But so that's kind of how that meeting format is imagined, and something similar. We'd be happy to help organize something similar, either virtually or in person. Or again, if it's more a discussion that Big Hole Watershed Committee would like to host internally, understanding that FWP is already through Vanna, at the table regularly. We're open either way, but we're here to help organize the outreach, and we'll be helping to present the panel and introduce the panel in December at the December 1st meeting.
Okay.
The only thing I'd add is that this focal area you're in has expanded. They recently, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, in their report to Interior, because they produce a report every year, they expanded the area, so they're interested in the Bitterroot and Upper Clark Fork. And it might, if it worked and you guys wanted to do this, it might be to invite participation from those areas to be in as well, or there may be a separate conversation there. But it's just important to note that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks wants to ensure there's good representation as much as possible throughout the focal area.
One thing else that I might say is, what's cool about this opportunity, I think, for the Private Lands Public Wildlife Council in general, is that it's a respected body that the legislature listens to, but it's typically focused a lot on access, and it's been, that's been the key thing. It includes landowners and sportsmen. It may be a little bit more sportsmen than landowners, but there's been a lot. It's currently dealing with an access implementation from a measure that was passed last session, and it's looking for a way to move beyond the question of access to simply, these ranches are critical in supporting intact landscapes. So how do we move beyond the question of access and basically say, how can we support landowners who are doing good things for wildlife, both in terms of helping with projects they're doing, but also in terms of mitigating the risk to their operations that wildlife movement can present. So it's a cool opportunity locally to weigh in, but also I think it's a good opportunity for PLPW to basically recognize in a whole nother topic how much good work is going on, how much ranches are doing on behalf of wildlife, and to ask how can we help be an advocate at the state level.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. Are folks on the producing side of things have thoughts or want to chime in?
This, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, now we can.
You're on mute again, Jim.
The hearing I had with Western Landowners Alliance, ecosystem services came in as an issue on this too, in regards to especially private land and wildlife on private land, where they're moving through or just sitting there. That's become a huge issue. Our ability to provide the infrastructure to accommodate our livestock on all the lands under our management is costing us about 35 to 40 bucks an AUM. And so that grass that those elk eat costs us a lot of money. I'm not so worried about it on federal land, but state and deeded ground, it sure adds up because we have to provide the infrastructure to graze it properly. And when our cattle don't get it, it hurts pretty bad. So ecosystem services may be something that one would want to think about. Depends on what kind of strings are attached, but I don't know a lot about the movement of elk in the Big Hole Valley in their migration. Dean would know more about that than I would. And a lot of this is all site specific too. So in regards to different herds of elk and how they move, but Vanna should have that pretty well underhand, I would assume.
If I could say a little bit, the elk in the Big Hole migrate in mostly for the summer, leave during the winter. So we don't have a lot of issues with wintertime elk eating haystacks or that. There's a little bit of it on the east side of the valley, but not a lot. The ones that have the most of the problem don't participate with a lot of the fishing game access deals. So they don't get a lot of help out of the fishing game because they don't want to work with them. But that's mainly one ranch. And they just generally herd the elk off themselves and feed them a little hay. But for the most part, there's not a lot of game in the Big Hole in the wintertime. That causes the most problem through the summer in our hay meadows. Vanna actually counts elk July on private land. And we've worked with the fishing game to keep our herd numbers down by 5 weeks of either sex, extra cow tags. There's a lot of things that we've done with the fishing game to improve where we stand there.
Thanks for that context, Dean and Jim. And just to reiterate too that I think the secretarial order focus on big game is primarily, it's mule deer, pronghorn, and elk being, of course, maybe one of the most controversial ones. But I think it's important from my perspective to keep in mind that the secretarial order was about big game, but FWP is still pretty, focused on wildlife movement more generally. And so it's back to something Jim was saying earlier regarding the Livestock Loss Board and predators. I think it's pretty hard to separate the issues of wildlife movement, between big game and predators. And I think PLPW may also provide a forum to, share with that committee the needs that the Livestock Loss Board has. I'm continuing, working with Gary, I'm continuing to work pretty closely with Western Landowners Alliance to make that ask in the session. And the PLPW meeting provides also another opportunity to, talk not only about the big game side, but the predator side. I wanted to mention that. And ask basically both for preventative funding that is specifically related to grizzly bear prevention, which the Livestock Loss Board doesn't currently have, and then also for more robust compensation when folks do have losses.
Well, I would be happy to help you and Gary set something up. I'll have to talk to Pedro and steering committee probably to see if we can do in person or if we think it'd be better to do virtual. But either way, I think that this is something that we'd be happy to participate in and set up a meeting.
Thanks,
Yeah, and I think it may be important also to, there's the big holes, it's so different, from the upper stretch of it to the lower stretch of it. And whether we try to kind of have one watershed wide conversation, or maybe break it out into the upper section of the river and the lower section of the river and just really see what bubbles up to the surface is kind of how I'm reading this and seeing what are the consistent sort of issues that keep coming up when we just sort of open the agenda around this subject. And would that kind of get us in the direction there, Cole and Gary, just kind of contextualize these subjects to our particular landscape and watersheds?
Yeah, it's interesting. Paradise Valley is kind of talking about the same thing. We'll hear more about that tomorrow, but we've heard the same thing that, even within the watershed, there's vastly different areas in the watershed to consider. And how do you hear enough voices in the watershed if you don't go to where folks are,
Yeah, and one other thing too, Pedro, is, this focal area in particular includes part of the Bitterroot and the Upper Clark Fork, and so if there's one virtual meeting or one in-person meeting, then we can kind of help make contacts in those places and share the invite. Or if there's multiple meetings and it makes more sense to break it up, that's fine too.
Yeah,
happy to help however we can.
Okay.
Concept and the upcoming PLPW meeting to you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I think an in-person meeting would be easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
For me, especially.
Somewhere around Wisdom or Jackson, maybe?
Yeah, whatever you can do. But I do think we need to participate at some level. And the grizzly bear is another issue that we're seeing here in the Big Hole.
Yeah.
We do get totally different participation in Jackson Wisdom than we do in Divide, Wise River, and probably even down lower too. So I think it, like Pedro said, a couple of meetings is probably the best way to go.
Yeah. That sounds right. It will be limited, just like this wildlife meeting that you guys, this brucellosis meeting, will be limited in how many folks we can actually convene in any given space. So, Dean, I think maybe we'll kind of lean on you a little bit to try to rally some people together at the right time. And then in the lower section of the river, Jim or Randy kind of do the same.
I can do that.
Yeah, it's intended to be a a public meeting in the sense that it's open to those who are most interested, but it's particularly we're really trying to reach out to those folks where big game and wildlife movement are really affecting their operations, and so we're really trying to it doesn't have to be a huge meeting, not trying to be exclusive, but I think even a relatively small meeting with folks that have particular interest in the topic would be helpful.
Great. Yeah, that's worthwhile. Definitely worthwhile to do. I mean, Cole, I mean, if at the end of the day, if what we're hearing from Dean is that there's not a lot of conflict there, and it doesn't seem to be, any one particular major issue, that doesn't mean that it's not relevant to bring up the issues that are relevant to the big hole and some of the preventative stuff that can be done. And one thing that it strikes me, and kind of this came up, Gary, in some of our conversations, is the particular nature of the interaction between the FWP personnel on the ground and the landowners in each given watershed seems to be an important factor as well. And things seem to be going pretty well for us here due to just the nature of the folks that are here.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that part of the overall effort, really, to make sure we're all working together.
If nothing else, too, just the opportunity to educate PLPW a bit. It's amazing in talking with them and talking with individual council members. They're like, oh, landowners are doing good things for wildlife, and they are, and obviously it's critical, right? And it's an opportunity for them to realize how critical, ranching and working lands community is, and from a different perspective than they've been hearing it. I think that has some value. And then, one of the things that the Migrations Coalition with Gary's leadership has also done is to basically study the way that other states have handled migration. And basically the results of that study are that often landowners are not part of the conversation early and often enough, and helping to lead the conversation. And so that's a big reason for doing it this way in Montana, is that it's really important to get your perspective on how the state should approach migration, particularly on wildlife and working lands, but it also comes to transportation and a host of issues. So reaching out and asking folks' feedback from those focal areas is critical from our perspective.
Right. Yeah, it's a helpful reminder to keep in mind the perspective that the people that sit on these councils have, and what their just overall knowledge base or understanding of the issues is. I because we're steeped in this stuff and we have conversations about it, it seems somewhat second nature. But it's an important reminder, and I think your guys' perspective in these meetings, I think, would be really helpful, because you engage at that level. And so that, I think that would be beneficial as well. I mean, making sure one of you two or both are present to kind of connect the big hole to this larger conversation that's happening, and making sure that we're providing the most relevant context.
Sounds good. Well, I have been in phone tag with Vanna, and she and I will have a conversation hopefully tomorrow in the next few days, and just touching base about our little spot on the agenda tonight, talking with you guys, and we've been, of course, coordinating with staff with FWB regularly on this topic, but I haven't had a chance to touch base with Vanna, so we'll do that just so you guys know. Hopefully we'll be able to circle up tomorrow.
Awesome. And Vanna will be presenting at our next meeting on wildlife. She's going to try to condense her normal, she usually updates kind of hunting district by hunting district and the changes they've made and all that, but she's going to kind of consolidate that, talk sage grouse and the pronghorn study that she's doing. So she's going to kind of roll it all into one. Maybe that, yeah, that'll be good to see where she's coming from and could help inform, you know, the conversation that we have. All right. Does anyone have questions for Gary or Cole? Or you guys have any other thoughts? I think that you guys laid it out pretty clearly here as far as I got my head wrapped around it. And anyone else want to chime in here? No. Not hearing anybody chomping at it. So, all right. Well, Gary and Cole, thank you for you guys taking the lead on this and kind of wrangling all of these different areas. It's kind of a big undertaking, but it's pretty important. So thanks for your leadership on this and thanks for coming and presenting to our group.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, looking forward to following up and working on this.
Absolutely. Okay, you'll hear from either myself or Tana directly and find the right times and start having these conversations.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so with that, if no one else has any parting thoughts or words, we will reconvene a month from now to hear about wildlife from Vanna Bacadori and more updates from the rest of the crew here at the committee. So with that said, thanks everybody for participating. Thank you, Sierra and the Nature Conservancy, for giving us your access to the Zoom machine. And
anytime.
We'll be getting better and better at this Zoom thing. It's going to be the way of the world for the foreseeable future. I hope everyone stays safe. Do a good rain dance. Hopefully get some moisture this weekend. And catch you guys next time.
Bye, all.
Okay, bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks much.
Good to see everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.